The wind off the North Sea was vicious the night Regulus Arcturus Black climbed out of the Black Lake. He had been dead for 2 years, or something close to dead. Hollowed, diminished, half dissolved in enchanted water, while a Horcrux absorbed what it could of his soul before spitting him back out as insufficient. The Inferi had dragged him under, the locket had hummed against his sternum, and then nothing for a very long time, except there had been something, a thin, stubborn thread of something that refused to snap. He came back to himself in pieces. His name, first, then the cold, then the particular shame of a black boy who had done something brave when no one was watching and survived it, which felt somehow worse than dying would have. Creature had found him washed up on the bank 3 days later, weeping with a devotion so fierce it was nearly violent. Regulus had lain in the creature's arms and stared at the ceiling of a cave and thought, Voldemort is not dead. The locket is not destroyed. I am alive and no one knows, and I have absolutely no idea what to do with any of this. He spent 2 years hiding. He was good at hiding. He had been a black, after all. And blacks were trained from infancy to present one face to the world, while the real business of their inner lives went on somewhere locked and lightless in their own. He hid in a muggle bedsit in Edinburgh, under glamours and an assumed name. He read, he thought, he wrote long letters to no one, and burned them. He watched the war in the prophet creature smuggled to him, and felt sick. He did not contact Sirius. He was not ready for Sirius. Sirius would look at him with those grey eyes that were the same as his own, and either weep or scream, and Regulus didn't think he could survive either. And then the war ended. November 1st, 1981. Regulus read the headline in a greasy chip shop on Leith Walk, He who must not be named defeated, the boy who lived, and sat very still for a very long time, with a cup of tea going cold in front of him. James Potter was dead. Lily Potter was dead. Voldemort was not destroyed. Regulus was almost certain of it. A man who had split his soul 7 times did not simply end because a curse rebounded. But he was gone, for now, and a baby boy with messy dark hair and his mother's eyes was apparently somewhere in Britain. An orphan. Famous. The symbol of everything the light side had bled for. Regulus thought about the Horcruxes. He thought about them for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, filling a notebook with cramped calculations and half-formed theories. He knew about one, the locket he had failed to destroy, which Creature had eventually confirmed was still hidden in Grimmauld Place, in a cabinet behind a curtain, where Mundungus Fletcher would eventually find it if no one was careful. He suspected there were others. He had spent 2 years reading everything Voldemort had ever published under his birth name. Every record of Tom Riddle's movements, and the picture that emerged was of a man obsessed with immortality and objects of significance, and the number 7. If Voldemort wasn't truly gone, he would come back. If he came back, it would be for Harry Potter. Regulus thought, someone has to be ready. And then, because he was 21 years old and had been hiding in a cave and a bedsit for 2 years and was arguably not making his best decisions, he thought, it should probably be me. Sirius Black had been in Azkaban for 12 days when Regulus walked through the front door of the Ministry of Magic, removed his glamour in the middle of the atrium, and told the first Auror who ran at him that he had information about Lord Voldemort's means of immortality and wanted to speak to Albus Dumbledore immediately. The chaos that followed was, by all accounts, extraordinary. Dumbledore came. Of course he came. Regulus Black, risen from the dead, was not something one sent a junior ministry official to handle. He came alone, which was either a profound gesture of trust or an indication that he had already assessed Regulus as non-threatening. And the two of them sat across from each other in a small interview room, while Regulus laid out everything he knew about the Horcruxes in a flat, precise voice that only shook once, very briefly, when he described the cave. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, his blue eyes behind their half-moon spectacles were very still. When Regulus finished, the old man was quiet for a long moment. "You are certain," Dumbledore said, "that the soul was divided?" "I would have died confirming it," Regulus said. "I very nearly did." Another pause. "And your brother?" Regulus looked at his hands. "Is he—" "He is in Azkaban, pending trial." Dumbledore's voice was careful. "He was arrested at the scene of the Pettigrew's deaths. Peter Pettigrew was the secret keeper, not Sirius. I have had my suspicions confirmed, though the evidence was largely destroyed in the explosion. Your brother is innocent." Regulus was very quiet for a moment. Something in his chest cracked along a seam he hadn't known was there. "Get him out," he said. "I intend to," Dumbledore said. "But these things take time," the Wizengamot. "I will testify," Regulus said. "I will tell them everything. My own crimes, my own knowledge of the Death Eaters, everything. I will give them names. I will give them evidence they have been looking for since the war began. And in exchange, you will get Sirius out of Azkaban before another week passes." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "That is a very great sacrifice." "I've been practicing," Regulus said. Sirius came home on a Tuesday in late November, thinner than Regulus had ever seen him, with shadows under his eyes that looked less like tiredness and more like something architectural, as if grief had moved into his face and begun renovating. He walked out of the ministry's front doors into weak autumn sunlight and stood on the steps blinking, and Regulus was there, on the pavement, in a coat that didn't fit properly because he'd bought it muggle and guessed at his own size. They stared at each other. 12 years of shared childhood, 2 years of estrangement, turned catastrophic. One war, multiple deaths, a cave, a locket, Azkaban. Sirius said, "You're supposed to be dead." "I know," Regulus said. Creature knew. Creature knew and didn't tell me. I told him not to." Sirius's jaw worked. His hands, at his sides, were shaking very slightly. "You let me think. I know. For 2 years. Sirius." Regulus took one step toward him. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. For the dark mark. For following him. For not— I'm sorry I wasn't someone you could come home to. And I'm sorry it took me dying to figure out why that mattered." He stopped. He was not, had never been, good at this. "I'm here now." Sirius Black, who had survived Azkaban without breaking because the Dementors could not take the knowledge of his own innocence, who had held himself together through sheer furious will for 12 days in a cell that smelled of salt and despair. Sirius Black put his face in his hands and cried. Regulus stood next to him on the ministry steps and did not touch him, because neither of them were people who touched easily, and waited. After a while, Sirius looked up. His eyes were red. He looked for a moment about 9 years old. "Harry," he said. "Where is Harry?" Dumbledore said Petunia and Vernon. Dumbledore placed him with the Muggles, Regulus said. Lily's sister. A blood protection. Sirius's expression did something complex and ugly. He put James's son with Petunia. There were wards. "I don't care about wards, Reg. I was James's secret keeper. I was supposed to be his godfather. I was supposed to—" Sirius stopped, pressed his knuckles briefly to his mouth. "I want him. James made me his guardian. It's in the will. Dumbledore said the will was sealed, but it exists. I was there when James wrote it. I want Harry." Regulus thought about this for a moment. "Then we'll get him," he said. "Dumbledore won't?" "Dumbledore," Regulus said, with the particular quiet certainty of someone who had recently bargained an innocent man out of Azkaban, "is not the only variable in this equation. It took 4 months. The legal battle was, by several accounts, one of the more spectacular pieces of wizarding litigation of the decade. Sirius had Dumbledore's reluctant support, James's will, and a solicitor named Iphigenia Crouch, no relation, who approached the Wizengamot with the force of a very small and extremely determined hurricane. Regulus had his testimony, his information on the Death Eaters, and a private conversation with Cornelius Fudge that neither of them ever spoke about publicly, but which seemed to resolve several outstanding concerns with remarkable efficiency. On March 3rd, 1982, Sirius Orion Black walked up the path of number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, and knocked on the door. Vernon Dursley opened it. He was a large man with a large moustache and the particular expression of someone who has been expecting bad news and is choosing to respond to it with aggression. "You," Vernon said. "Me," Sirius agreed pleasantly. He held up the legal document. "I'm here for my godson." Harry James Potter was 16 months old. He was sitting in a playpen in the middle of the Dursleys' aggressively normal sitting room, examining a rubber duck with the intense focus of someone conducting serious research. He had James's catastrophic hair and Lily's eyes and a small lightning bolt scar on his forehead that made Sirius's heart do something painful. Harry looked up at Sirius, considered him with those green eyes, and then, with the serene confidence of a very small child who has already categorized the world into interesting and not interesting, held out the rubber duck. "Oh," Sirius said. His voice came out strange. Yeah, I'll take that, mate." He took the duck. He picked up Harry. Harry grabbed a fistful of his hair, which was apparently fascinating, and made a sound of deep satisfaction. Sirius stood in Vernon Dursley's sitting room, holding his best friend's son, and thought, James, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm going to take such good care of him. I promise. I promise I'm going to." "Right," he said to no one in particular. "Let's go home then." Home was, after some negotiation, Grimmauld Place. This was Regulus's doing. Sirius had wanted to sell it, burn it, or both. And Regulus had said, with maddening practicality, that the Black family home was the most heavily warded property in Britain. That it had 12 bedrooms and a library with books that Dumbledore would have found very useful if he'd thought to ask, and that running away from difficult things was, with respect, Sirius's approach to problems rather than his own. They had a fairly significant argument about this that ended with Sirius putting his fist to a wall and Regulus saying nothing, just watching, which was somehow more infuriating. They kept the house. They spent 3 weeks destroying the worst of it. The dark artifacts, the portraits they couldn't stand. Mrs. Black's was, after an impressive battle, sealed behind a curtain so thick and so heavily silenced that her screaming was reduced to an occasional distant vibration. The letters and documents that catalogued 4 generations of Black family ugliness. They repainted. They hired a Muggle contractor named Steve, who asked no questions about the architecture and did excellent work on the kitchen. They planted things in the back garden, mostly because Regulus had read somewhere that gardening was therapeutic, and he was approaching his own recovery from 2 years of trauma with the same methodical determination he had applied to his research. Harry Potter grew up in a house that smelled of old books and cooking, and on weekends, the particular sharp, clean smell of a motorbike engine. Because Sirius kept the Triumph in the back garden and was always working on something. He grew up with Creature, who approached infant care with the offended dignity of someone vastly overqualified for the position, and whose attachment to Harry became, quietly and then overwhelmingly, absolute. He grew up with a large and drafty library that he was allowed to read in from almost before he could properly read, and a kitchen where Regulus cooked with the focused intensity of a potion student, and a sitting room where Sirius played records at volumes that made the chandelier vibrate. He grew up, in short, in a house full of complicated adults doing their genuine best. Hermione Granger arrived 3 years later, and entirely by accident. Jean and Robert Granger were dentists in Hampstead, and were the sort of thorough, careful, intellectually serious people who, when their 4-year-old daughter melted a crayon into a perfect helical coil without touching it, and then asked why it had done that, bought her 3 books on chemistry before acknowledging that chemistry might not, in fact, be the relevant discipline. They found their way to Dumbledore through channels that Regulus, when he heard the story later, thought were remarkably circuitous. They had heard, through a friend of a friend, about a school for children with unusual abilities. They had done a considerable amount of research. They had made inquiries. They had arrived, eventually, at a conversation with Minerva McGonagall, who had referred them to Albus Dumbledore, who had assured them that their daughter was a witch and would receive her Hogwarts letter in due course, and was in the meantime perfectly safe. The Grangers were not particularly satisfied with "in due course" and "perfectly safe" as answers. "We would like to know more people," Jean Granger said, with a precision that Regulus would later recognize in her daughter, who are in the same position as us. Parents of children like Hermione. Is there a community, a network, people we could speak to who understand what this is like? Dumbledore, who was many things but not always attentive to the practical needs of Muggle-born families, had suggested, somewhat vaguely, that the wizarding world was welcoming and that they need not worry. McGonagall, who had more sense, had given them Regulus Black's address. Regulus was in the back garden arguing with a rosebush when the Grangers knocked. He let them in. He made tea. He answered their questions with more patience than he showed most adults, because they were asking good questions and taking notes, which he respected. And because their daughter sat very quietly in the corner of the kitchen and watched everything with enormous dark eyes that missed nothing. Harry was 5. He came in from wherever he'd been, on top of a bookshelf probably. He had phases, and looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry said, "Have you seen the library?" Hermione said, "You have a library." Harry said, "It's got books about dragons." Hermione said very seriously, "I would like to see those." Harry led her away. Regulus exchanged a glance with the Grangers. The Grangers exchanged a glance with each other. "They'll be fine," Regulus said. "Harry doesn't let anyone touch the books without permission. So they'll probably be in there for 4 hours discussing cataloging systems." This was, in fact, exactly what happened. The Grangers came back the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that. By the time summer was over, it had become unremarkable for Hermione to spend several days a week at Grimmauld Place, and for Harry to visit Hampstead and be fed biscuits by Robert, and have his teeth inspected by Jean, who seemed to find this both professionally satisfying and a reasonable exchange for the magical instruction her daughter was receiving. When Hermione was 6, there was an incident with the Wronski feint that Sirius had been demonstrating on his broom in the back garden at low altitude. He had been clear about that. He had been responsible. That ended with her falling 6 feet and being fine, entirely fine, completely uninjured, because she had apparently conjured a cushioning charm from nowhere before she hit the ground, which was the most accidental advanced magic Regulus had encountered in years. "She should stay here," Sirius said that evening, while Harry slept and Hermione was asleep on the sitting room sofa with a book on her face. "It's not safe, these accidental outbursts. She needs proper instruction. She should just—" "You can't just keep a child because you like her," Regulus said. "I'm not keeping her," Sirius said, affronted. "I'm offering a structured magical development environment." "She has parents," Regulus said, "who are muggles." "Who are also," Regulus said, "perfectly competent people, which you would know if you'd spent more than 40 minutes in their company. They're not the Dursleys, Sirius." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "they're not. It was the Grangers who proposed it, in the end. A formal arrangement, legal on both sides, that recognized the reality of what had already developed. Hermione would live primarily with her parents, but would have full access to Grimmauld Place, its library, and the magical instruction that 2 black family-educated wizards could provide. She would have holidays with the Blacks, and Harry would have holidays with the Grangers. She was, in all the ways that actually mattered, theirs. The thing about Sirius and Regulus Black was that they loved each other the way people love things they have nearly lost, desperately, clumsily, with a great deal of residual damage making itself known at inconvenient moments. They had not been close as children. That was the foundational truth neither of them said aloud, but both understood. They had been brothers in a house that treated brotherhood as an obligation rather than a relationship, where Wahlburger Black distributed affection the way a general distributes ammunition, strategically, sparingly, and always in service of a larger objective. Sirius had been the disappointment. Regulus had been the heir. These were the roles, and the roles were iron. And the small boy who had once followed his older brother through the corridors of Grimmauld Place, asking questions. Why does the tapestry have burn marks? Why do we have to say blood traitor like it's a bad thing? Why don't we just leave? Had eventually stopped asking and started performing instead. Sirius had left for the Potters when he was 16. Regulus had watched him go and said nothing, because he was 14 and furious and heartbroken and had no vocabulary for either of those things. And the silence between them had calcified into something that looked, from the outside, like indifference. It wasn't indifference. It had never been indifference. But love without the tools to express it will find other channels, and in the Black family, the available channels were mostly corrosive. So, they had Harry. They had Grimmauld Place. They had a set of tasks that needed doing, meals and bedtimes and bath times, and reading aloud, and the small, relentless infrastructure of keeping a child alive and happy. And those tasks, it turned out, were a language both of them could speak. It was not seamless. It was frequently not even comfortable. But it was real, which was more than either of them had expected. The first year was mostly about logistics. Sirius had never been responsible for anything in his life that couldn't be outrun on a motorbike, and the discovery that babies required constant maintenance hit him with the force of a revelation. Harry needed feeding every few hours. Harry needed changing. Harry needed to be held when he cried. And the crying was not, as Sirius had optimistically assumed, a problem that could be solved through charm and enthusiasm. Why is he still crying? Sirius said, on the fourth night, standing in the middle of the kitchen at 2 in the morning with Harry on his shoulder, rocking with the mechanical desperation of someone who has been doing the same thing for 40 minutes and is running out of faith. Regulus looked up from the book he was reading at the kitchen table. He had made tea. He had not offered Sirius any, which was arguably its own statement. He's teething, he said. Page 43 says you can rub oil of cloves on the gum. You've been reading a parenting book? Someone has to, and you're sitting there reading it instead of. You said you had it handled, Regulus said. You were very clear. You said, and I quote, I've got this, Reg. He just needs a cuddle. You can go back to sleep. Sirius opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at Harry, who was still crying, but had paused to grab Sirius's finger, which he was holding with the crushing grip of someone with a legitimate grievance. Where's the oil of cloves? Sirius said. Third cabinet, left side. A pause. Then, grudgingly, thank you. You're welcome. This was, more or less, the shape of their first year. Sirius, charging in with energy and love, and absolutely no plan. Regulus reading the relevant book and waiting to be asked. Both of them stubborn enough to make this inefficient, and honest enough to admit eventually that neither of them was getting anywhere alone. By Harry's second birthday, they had something resembling a system. Harry Potter was, from the beginning, a child who collected questions the way other children collected rocks, obsessively, indiscriminately, with no apparent interest in limiting the pile. Why was the sky blue? Why did Sirius's hair go wavy when it was raining? Why did Regulus always stir things 3 times before tasting them? Why was the portrait lady behind the curtain angry? Why were some families like theirs and other families not? Regulus answered questions with the thoroughness of a man who found imprecision offensive. Sirius answered them with the enthusiasm of someone who found children's minds genuinely interesting. and didn't mind admitting when he didn't know something, which led to a great many joint expeditions to the library. "The sky is blue," Regulus said once when Harry was 4 and had asked for the third time in a week because of the way sunlight scatters through the atmosphere. Blue light has a shorter wavelength than red light, which means it bounces around more. When you look up at the sky, what you're seeing is bounced light. Harry considered this. What about at sunset? At sunset, the sunlight is traveling through more atmosphere to reach you, so most of the blue light scatters away before it arrives, and you get the longer wavelengths. Orange, red. So sunset is the sky showing you what it usually hides? Regulus paused. He looked at his nephew. Technically his nephew, though the word felt both correct and wildly insufficient, with an expression he rarely showed adults. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly right." Harry beamed. He had James's smile, wide and a little crooked, and it still made Regulus's chest do something complicated. "Can we do an experiment?" "What kind of experiment?" "To make inside sunset, with light and water and stuff." They spent the afternoon scattering light through glass prisms and bowls of water in the kitchen, Harry on his knees on the table for better reach, Regulus beside him redirecting the prisms with careful hands. Both of them cataloguing what they found in a small notebook that Harry had decorated with a drawing of what he described as a dragon but also a bit of a dog, which did bear a passing resemblance to Sirius. This was how Harry learned about the world, carefully, with evidence, with someone beside him who took his questions seriously. Sirius taught him other things. He taught him the constellation mythology, because the Blacks had always known their stars, and Sirius saw no reason the tradition should die just because the tradition had also produced some deeply horrible people. He lay in the back garden on summer nights with Harry on his chest and told him about Orion and Andromeda and Cassiopeia, and carefully, deliberately, chose not to mention that those were also the names of their family members, until Harry was old enough to find the connection interesting rather than confusing. He taught him about the motorbike. Not to ride it, he wasn't a complete lunatic, but its mechanics, its history, the particular way it sounded different depending on what was wrong with it. Harry learned to identify a carburetor problem by ear at age 6, which was arguably not useful knowledge, but which he was enormously proud of. He taught him, through no deliberate effort at all, that grief was something you carried rather than something you put down. He did not hide James and Lily from Harry. They were on the walls, photographs, moving, photographs that Sirius had spent considerable effort collecting, so that Harry grew up knowing his parents' faces, his mother's laugh, his father's ridiculous wave, the particular way they'd looked at each other that Sirius could not describe without his voice doing something embarrassing. He talked about them. He told stories, the good ones first, the funny ones, the ones that showed Harry who his parents had been as people rather than as symbols. Later, carefully, the harder ones. "Did you miss them?" Harry asked once. He was 7. He was sitting on the kitchen counter, eating a piece of bread and butter and watching Sirius make dinner. "Every day," Sirius said, without drama, just truth. Harry nodded slowly. "I miss them too," he said, "even though I don't really remember them. Is that strange?" "No," Sirius said. "I think that's one of the most normal things I've ever heard." Harry seemed satisfied with this. He ate his bread. "Regulus says grief is like a scar," he said. "It hurts less as you get older, but it's always there, and it's part of you." Sirius considered his brother, the way he dispensed difficult truths to children with a directness that somehow managed to be gentle. "Regulus is right," he said. "He usually is," Harry said. "Don't tell him I said that." "I absolutely will tell him that." Sirius. The tension between the brothers surfaced, as it always did, sideways. It was rarely about Harry directly. It was about the house, Sirius wanting to repaint the dining room, Regulus wanting to keep the structural wards intact and arguing that the painting charm was already compromised. It was about cooking, Sirius making scrambled eggs at midnight and leaving the pan, Regulus leaving a note about the pan that was technically polite and somehow still devastating. It was about old friends of Sirius's who visited and were loud and comfortable in a way that made Regulus go very quiet at the edges of rooms. Not unfriendly, exactly, but present in the way a person is present when they're calculating whether they belong. "You're allowed to just be here," Sirius said once, after Remus Lupin had visited and left and Harry was in bed. "You don't have to audit the situation." "I'm not auditing anything. You sit in corners and watch people like you're deciding whether they're a threat." "Some of them are," Regulus said. "Remus Lupin is the least threatening. He's a werewolf, and the ministry still hasn't passed the reforms, and there are 3 children in this house. He would never." "I know he would never," Regulus said, with a patience that Sirius found somehow more infuriating than shouting. "I know that. I also know that the law doesn't care what he would or wouldn't do, and if something went wrong, it wouldn't be Lupin who suffered for it. It would be us. And I am not. I am not willing to make Harry pay for our sentimentality." Silence. "That's not sentimentality," Sirius said. "No," Regulus said. "It's not. I'm sorry. That was unfair." The apology landed awkwardly, the way Regulus's apologies always did. Too precise, too self-aware, arriving like a correctly formatted document when what the situation called for was a conversation. Sirius recognized this. He was learning, slowly, that Regulus's emotional literacy was not impaired so much as it was academic. He understood feelings the way he understood potions theory, could describe them accurately and analyze their components, but the lived practice of them was something he was still working out. "You can just say you're worried," Sirius said. "You're allowed." Regulus looked at him. "I'm worried," he said. "About Remus?" "About everything," Regulus said. "All the time." Is that information you needed?" Sirius laughed, which he hadn't expected to. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, it is, actually." Hermione Granger, when she arrived properly into their lives, changed the dynamic in ways none of them had predicted. She was, from the first, a child who wanted to understand systems, not just facts. Hermione was interested in how things connected, why rules existed, what happened when you pushed at the edges of things. She and Harry were not the same kind of curious. Harry's curiosity was experimental, hands-on. Let's try it and see. Hermione's was architectural. She wanted to understand the whole structure before she touched any part of it. They were, together, formidable. "I've been thinking," Hermione said one morning, when she was 7 and Harry was 7, sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of parchment covered in her very small, very neat handwriting, "about the rules of accidental magic." Regulus, making tea, turned around. "What about them?" "Well, the books say accidental magic happens when a child's emotions overwhelm their control. But that's circular. What's the mechanism? What's actually happening physically? Is it the same as deliberate casting? Is there a different pathway?" A pause. "Where did you find those books?" "Your library, the section on theoretical wandwork. Top left shelf." Regulus looked at Harry, who had the expression of someone who knows he was involved in a plan and is hoping he won't be asked to confirm it. "Did you help her find those?" "She found them herself," Harry said. "I just told her where top left was because I'm taller." "I have questions," Hermione said, setting down her parchment with the air of someone who has been patient for long enough. Regulus sat down across from her. He looked at her notes, proper notes, with headings, with questions numbered in order of what she had identified as logical priority. He felt something he couldn't quite name, which was probably the specific satisfaction of encountering a mind that worked like his own. "Ask them," he said. Hermione asked all 11 of her numbered questions. Regulus answered each one in full. Harry ate toast and contributed occasional observations that were, about 50% of the time, entirely correct, and the other 50% wildly off base but interesting enough to pursue. Sirius came downstairs at 9, made himself coffee, looked at the scene in the kitchen, and quietly withdrew to the sitting room to read the prophet without disturbing what was clearly an ongoing seminar. "You're smiling," Remus said later, on the flu. "Am not," Sirius said. "You absolutely are. What happened?" Sirius looked toward the kitchen where he could still hear voices, Hermione asking something, Regulus's measured answer, Harry's, "But why does that mean?" and felt, with a warmth that still sometimes caught him off guard, something that he had no better word for than home. "Nothing," he said. "Just Tuesday." The question of the scar came up when Harry was 8. He had known about it for years. Obviously, it was on his face he had eyes. He knew the story in its outline. His parents had died protecting him. Voldemort had cast a curse. The curse had rebounded. He knew he was the boy who lived, in the distant abstract way that children know things about themselves that are more concept than lived reality. Sirius had been careful and consistent and honest about this, without turning it into a defining feature of Harry's identity. "You are James's son and Lily's son, and you live in this house, and you are curious and funny, and you have your father's hair, which is your own fault for refusing to let me brush it this morning." But at 8, Harry started asking harder questions. "Why did Voldemort go to my parents in the first place?" he said. He was in the library, and Regulus was opposite him, and he said it the way he said most hard things, carefully, with the slight forward tilt that meant he'd been thinking about it for a while. Regulus set down his book. "That is a complicated answer. I know. I've been waiting till I was old enough." "Who told you you'd need to wait?" "I sort of figured," Harry said. "You and Sirius get the careful voice when it's something you're not sure I'm ready for. But I'm ready." Regulus thought for a moment. Then he said, "There was a prophecy." He told Harry about it. Not all of it, because he only knew the general shape of it himself, but enough. A prophecy about a child born at the end of July, born to parents who had defied Voldemort. A prophecy that Voldemort had heard and acted on. The reason the Potters had been in hiding. The reason there had been a secret keeper. The reason James and Lily's deaths had not been random violence but a specific targeted act. Harry was quiet for a long time when Regulus finished. "So he came for me specifically," Harry said. "Yes, and he's not really gone." Regulus paused. This was the part he had discussed with Sirius at length. What to tell Harry, how much, when. Sirius had wanted to wait. Regulus had argued that a child prepared for the truth was safer than a child who encountered it without context. They had not fully resolved this disagreement. "No," Regulus said. "I don't believe he's truly gone. I believe he's diminished, waiting. I am working on understanding what will bring him back, and what might stop that. You're trying to fix it. I'm trying to understand it." Harry looked at him. "Can I help? When you're older?" "You keep saying that." "Because you keep getting older," Regulus said. "So far it's working. When Harry was 9, Sirius taught him to fly. This was, Regulus said, too young. Sirius said it was perfectly safe. He'd been flying since he was 8. Regulus said that proved nothing, except that the Blacks had historically poor risk assessment. Sirius said that Harry had perfect instincts and would be fine. Regulus said that instincts didn't prevent falls. Harry flew. He was, as Sirius had said, naturally gifted. He took to the broom with an ease that looked less like learning and more like recognition. Like the broom was something he had always known how to do and was simply remembering. He wasn't reckless. He went up to a careful height and came down and asked very seriously if he could go a bit higher. "How much higher?" Sirius said. Harry pointed at the roofline. "Absolutely," Sirius said. Harry went up to the roofline. He hovered there for a moment. looking out over the London rooftops in the thin spring light, hair doing what it always did in wind. And Sirius watched him and felt something crack open in his chest that had nothing to do with grief for once, and everything to do with joy. Straightforward, uncomplicated joy. The kind he'd nearly forgotten was available to him. Regulus stood beside him and watched. "He's good," Regulus said quietly. "He's James," Sirius said. A pause. "He's also Lily," Regulus said. "He landed level. James never landed level." Sirius laughed. "That's... yeah. Yeah, that's fair." It was, Regulus would reflect later, one of the first times they had talked about James and Lily together without it costing either of them something. It felt like a small door opening. He didn't make anything of it, but he noticed. Hermione came for her first full summer when she was 9. The Grangers had a planned trip to France, a dental conference for Robert, a holiday for Jean and Hermione. But Hermione had made a list of things she wanted to study that summer, and had looked at her parents with the expression she'd inherited directly from Jean, which was polite and absolutely immovable. And the compromise had been a month at Grimmauld Place before France and 2 weeks after. She arrived with 4 books, a notebook, a toothbrush, and a small cat she had acquired at some point that no one had been consulted about. "You have a cat," Harry said. "His name is Claudius," Hermione said. "He's very intelligent." "Is he?" "He knocks things off shelves in order of height. Tallest first. I've measured." Harry considered the cat, who was sitting in Hermione's bag and regarding the whole way with the expression of someone who has done an assessment and found everything borderline acceptable. "I like him," Harry decided. Regulus looked at the cat. The cat looked at Regulus. "He's not allowed in the library," Regulus said. Hermione said nothing, which was the same as agreement, and also probably not agreement at all. Claudius spent the summer in the library. That summer was, in the memory of all 4 of them, the summer things locked into place. They found a rhythm, real days, with structure and spontaneity both. Mornings were reading or study, because both children were the kind of people who needed intellectual occupation or became interesting in the wrong way. Afternoons were open, the garden, the broom, expeditions to Muggle London, where Sirius was notoriously easy to distract, by street food, and Regulus walked like someone conducting a reconnaissance and read every plaque on every building they passed. Evenings were cooking together and eating together and talking, which was the part that mattered most. They talked about everything, history, magical, and Muggle, which Regulus taught with equal seriousness because you could not understand one without the other. Science, which was Hermione's particular passion and which Regulus had made it his business to learn properly so he could engage with her at the level she needed. Stories. Sirius was the teller of stories, with the performer's instinct for drama and timing, and Harry and Hermione both would lean forward on their elbows and listen with the focus of people who understand they are getting something valuable. "Tell us about the Marauders," Hermione said one evening. She was already compiling what Harry called her Sirius file, which was a notebook in which she recorded family history with the thoroughness of a biographer. Sirius smiled, the smile that arrived whenever the Marauders came up, warm and complicated, and still slightly painful in the way that scar tissue is slightly painful. "What do you want to know?" "How did you become an animagus?" Hermione said. "And who had the idea first, and what did Dumbledore say when he found out, and why were you called the Marauders specifically?" And "One at a time," Sirius said. "Sorry," Hermione said. She looked down at her notebook. "First question, how did you become an animagus?" Regulus made a small gesture that meant, "Your story, your call." "Right," Sirius said. "So, 3rd year, Remus Lupin." The thing you need to understand about Remus is that he was the smartest person I'd ever met, and also the most certain that he didn't deserve anything good happening to him. And that combination made Peter and James and me absolutely determined to prove him wrong. Harry and Hermione leaned forward. Regulus very quietly made more tea. The letters came in July of 1991. Two owls arriving within minutes of each other. One for Harry James Potter and one for Hermione Jean Granger, both addressed with the particular certainty of letters that know exactly who they're looking for and are not interested in ambiguity. Harry held his for a moment, without opening it. He had known it was coming. Of course he had known. They had been preparing him for Hogwarts for years. It was a fact of his future, the same way Christmas was a fact of December. But holding the letter was different from knowing about the letter. The way touching a door handle is different from knowing a room exists on the other side. He looked at Sirius. Sirius was doing an unconvincing impression of someone who wasn't about to cry. He looked at Regulus. Regulus was doing a convincing impression of someone entirely composed, which Harry had learned over 9 years meant that Regulus was feeling something large and was choosing not to let it out in public. Harry opened the letter. Hermione had hers open before him and was already reading with the focus of someone cross-referencing against prior knowledge. "The supply list is shorter than I expected," she said. "Based on the first-year curriculum I extrapolated from the titles Regulus has references to, I'd have expected at least 2 more texts in defense against the dark arts." "Hermione," Harry said. She looked up. "Yes?" He held up his letter. "We're going to Hogwarts." A pause. Something shifted in her expression, crossed from analysis into something simpler and more genuine, the face she showed when she forgot to perform composure. "We're going to Hogwarts," she said. Harry grinned. James's grin, wide and bright and entirely unavoidable. Sirius made a sound. He was definitely not crying. He was absolutely not. He turned away and appeared to need something from a cabinet. "Sirius," Harry said. "I'm fine," Sirius said to the cabinet. "You're crying. I have something in my eye." Both eyes. Regulus touched Harry's shoulder briefly. Just a light touch, the kind of contact he managed when the moment called for it. "We'll get your supplies next week," he said. "The full list. All of it." He paused. "And we will go over what I know about the Hogwarts curriculum before you leave, because there are several gaps in the standard first-year teaching that I consider unacceptable." "You've been planning this," Harry said. "Since you were 3, Regulus said. Harry laughed. Hermione was already writing something in her notebook. Sirius turned around from the cabinet, not crying, definitely not crying, and looked at these 2 children in his kitchen. James's son, who collected questions like rocks, and Hermione Granger, who catalogued them like a library, and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for a very long time. This had worked, against every odd, despite every damage, with 2 broken black brothers and a lot of cooking and a library and a motorbike in the garden. This had worked. "Right," he said. "Diagon Alley. Saturday. We're doing this properly." Diagon Alley on a Saturday in August was, as it always was, magnificent chaos. Sirius moved through it like a man returning to a country he had mixed feelings about. Broad-shouldered, conspicuous, drawing looks that he'd long since learned to simply not acknowledge. The name Black still meant something in Wizarding Britain. Complicated things. Layered things. And Sirius had decided years ago that the only sensible response to that was to take up the same amount of space he'd always taken up and let people sort out their own feelings about it. Regulus moved through it the way he moved through most public spaces, efficiently, with his eyes on everything, 3 steps to Sirius's right in what Harry had privately identified as the Regulus default formation: present, observant, slightly separate. Harry and Hermione moved through it the way they moved through everything, together with a running commentary that required no particular invitation to join and no particular credentials to follow. "Madam Malkin's first," Regulus said. "Then books. Then wands last. Wand choosing takes time, and I don't want you distracted by it, before we've sorted the rest." "Can we do Ollivanders first?" Harry said. "No." "Why not?" because you'll spend an hour in there and come out unable to think about anything else. And then you'll put your robes on backwards. That was once, and I was 6. The principal holds. Hermione, who had a list, was already consulting it. She had made the list herself, cross-referenced against Regulus's supply recommendations, with a supplementary column for books she intended to acquire beyond the required texts. It was, by any measure, an excellent list. Flourish and Blots has a sale on the Standard Book of Spells series, she said. If we buy the full run through 7th year, we save 14 sickles. We're only buying first-year texts, Regulus said. We'd be saving 14 sickles, Hermione said. A pause. Regulus looked at her with the expression he reserved for arguments he had technically already lost. How did you know about the sale? I wrote to the shop in June. Sirius made a noise that was definitively a laugh disguised as a cough. Ollivander's came last, as Regulus had decreed, and was everything he had warned about, and more. Mr. Ollivander was the particular kind of person who made Harry feel simultaneously seen and slightly alarmed. Pale eyes that moved over him, with an attention that had nothing polite in it, just pure assessment, the way Regulus looked at a potions problem. He measured Harry's arm span and the space between his eyes and the length of his fingers, and produced a series of wands that Harry tried and discarded, each one doing something different. Sparks, wind, a brief and inexplicable smell of cinnamon, until the 11th wand, 11th inches, holly, phoenix feather. Curious, Ollivander said, when the wand sent a warm light spinning through the shop. Very curious. What's curious? Harry said. The phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave another feather. Just one other. Ollivander's pale eyes were steady. It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar. Harry was quiet for a moment. He had known about the scar's origin for 3 years. He was not unacquainted with the idea that Voldemort was a fact of his life, rather than a story from it. But there was something about being in this dusty wand-shaving smell shop and being told that the wand in his hand was a brother to the thing that had killed his parents that made the knowledge land differently. He looked at Regulus, who was standing by the door. Regulus gave him a small, level nod. I know. We'll talk about it. You're all right. What does that mean? He said. For the wand, it means, Ollivander said, that you may expect unusual things from it. Wands with brother cores often behave strangely when pitted against each other. Beyond that, a slight pause, a slight tilt of the head. I think we shall simply have to wait and see. I'd rather understand it now than wait and see, Harry said. Ollivander looked at him with something that might have been surprised approval. Yes, he said, I imagine you would. Hermione's wand was 10 3/4 inches, vine wood, dragon heartstring, and chose her with an efficiency that suggested it had been waiting. The shop filled with light, not sparks, not wind, but a steady warm brightness, the kind that made everything in the room look more clearly defined. Even Ollivander blinked. Vine wood, he said, more to himself than to her. For those with hidden depths, those who find their greatest purpose in their mission. Hermione held the wand with both hands for a moment, carefully, as if taking its measure. Then she said, Is vinewood particularly suited to any branch of magic? More drawn to those who wield it, Ollivander said. It chooses for character, not category. Hermione appeared to find this both interesting and slightly unsatisfying, in the specific ways she found anything she couldn't fully systematize. She made a note. On the 1st of September, the platform was everything Sirius had described, and somehow still managed to surprise. Harry stood at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and looked at the solid-seeming wall and thought, not for the first time, about the way magic organized itself. Its willingness to hide things in plain sight, its cheerful disregard for what Muggles had decided was structurally possible. Then he walked through, because knowing the trick was not the same as not finding it wonderful, and came out on the other side into steam and noise, and read The Hogwarts Express. Regulus was behind him, and then beside him, adjusting the strap on Harry's trunk with the focused efficiency of a man preventing himself from doing something more. Sirius had Harry's other shoulder, and the two of them stood on either side of him in what Harry had come to think of as their unconscious formation, the way they bracketed him without discussing it. The way the space they made around him was specific to him. Platform rule, Sirius said. Same as always. If I need help, I ask a prefect, a teacher, or a ghost, Harry said. Ghosts are underutilized as information sources. Good. What else? Don't let anyone make me feel small about the scar. Don't let anyone make me feel big about it either. And, Harry looked at him, write to you, both of you. At least twice a week. Sirius squeezed his shoulder. The grip was slightly too tight for a moment. Then, right, go on. Harry turned to Regulus. Regulus straightened Harry's collar, which did not need straightening. It was the closest he got to embracing people in public. Harry had learned to accept it as the thing it was. You know more than they'll expect, Regulus said. Don't show it all at once. Make friends before you make impressions. Is that what you did at Hogwarts? A pause. No, Regulus said, I made the opposite of every mistake I'm asking you to avoid, which is why I am in a position to advise you. Harry smiled. He turned to Hermione, who was standing slightly to the side with Claudius in his carrier and her list tucked into her pocket, and the expression she got when she was trying not to be visibly excited. Ready? I've been ready since June, Hermione said. They got on the train. They found a compartment together and were joined, shortly, by a red-haired boy with freckles and a smear of something on his nose who opened the door and said, Do you mind? Everywhere else is packed, with the directness of someone who has 6 siblings and no patience for unnecessary social ceremony. I'm Harry, Harry said. Ron Weasley. He sat down across from them with the ease of someone at home, anywhere. Then he noticed the carrier. Is that a cat? His name is Claudius, Hermione said. He's very intelligent. Ron appeared to have opinions about cats, but had the social sense to keep them to himself. I've got Scabbers, he said, producing a grey rat from his pocket. He's not very intelligent. I don't think he's got much of anything, honestly. He's been in the family since Percy was little. Harry looked at the rat. The rat looked at Harry. Something about it made Harry mildly uneasy in a way he couldn't name. A faint, sourceless awareness of wrongness, like a note slightly off-key. He filed it away. Regulus had taught him to file things away. Are you a Muggle-born? Ron was asking Hermione, with the guileless curiosity of someone who had grown up in a household where such questions were asked straightforwardly and without malice. Yes, Hermione said. My parents are dentists. What's a dentist? Tooth doctor. They're very thorough about it. And Harry, you're the... He was trying, very visibly, not to stare at the scar. Yes, Harry said, not unfriendly, just straightforward, the way Sirius had taught him, acknowledgement without invitation. My mum says, everyone says, sorry. Is it weird that I know who you are? A bit, Harry said, but not in a bad way. I grew up knowing, so it's not like it surprises me. I just don't think it's the most interesting thing about me. Ron thought about this. What is the most interesting thing about you? I can identify a carburetor problem by sound. Ron looked blank. On a motorbike, Harry said. It's a Muggle vehicle. Very good engineering. That's right. Ron seemed to be recalibrating his expectations. He grinned suddenly, which transformed his face entirely. My dad would love you. He's obsessed with Muggle stuff. Harry grinned back. The sorting was, as Sirius had promised, dramatic. Harry sat under the hat and waited. And the hat, for its part, seemed to have a great deal to say. Interesting. It said, in the way of something that finds very little genuinely interesting and is pleased to have found something. Very interesting. You've been prepared, haven't you? Most children come in here with their heads full of Quidditch scores and worry about friendships. You've come in with, well, considerable prior knowledge. I was well taught, Harry thought. Regulus Black the Hat said, with a tone Harry couldn't quite place. He was mine, once, Slytherin. And his brother, Slytherin too, for a time, before he stopped performing for me and showed me what was actually there. Gryffindor, obviously. I don't get many who are genuinely both. What am I? Harry thought. The hat was quiet for a moment. That, it said, is actually a complicated question. You have the mind of a Slytherin and the heart of a Gryffindor and the work ethic of a Hufflepuff and the curiosity of a Ravenclaw, and I could make an argument for any of them. But you've been thinking about one house all the way across Scotland on that train, and that house has been thinking about you since before you were born, and there is no use pretending otherwise. A pause. Better be. Gryffindor! The hall erupted. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table with James's walk. He'd been told about it enough times that he'd developed it unconsciously. The loose-limbed ease of someone who's never had trouble taking up space, and sat down beside a girl with brown skin and a warm smile who said, I'm Lavender. Are you really Harry Potter? And he said, yes, and please don't make it weird. And she laughed, and that was that. Hermione was sorted Gryffindor too, after a conversation with the hat that she refused to describe in its entirety but confirmed had included a brief debate about whether knowledge for its own sake was a Ravenclaw virtue or a universal one. I told it that knowledge in service of action was specifically Gryffindor, she said, settling in beside Harry at the table. And it said that was a very Regulus black-trained answer, and I said thank you. And it sorted me. Did it actually say Regulus's name? It seemed to know him, Hermione said. I got the impression it remembers everyone. Ron, sorted Gryffindor with no apparent internal debate whatsoever, leaned around Harry. Does the hat talk to everyone? I think it talks more to some people, Harry said. It just told me Gryffindor straight away, Ron said. Didn't even pause. Maybe you're uncomplicated, Hermione said. Ron considered this. I'll take it, he said. The castle was everything and nothing like what Harry had expected. He had expected magnificence. Sirius's stories and Regulus's measured descriptions had prepared him for scale and history, and the particular feeling of walking through somewhere that had absorbed 8 centuries of magic into its stones. What he hadn't expected was how much it felt like being inside something that was paying attention. The staircases moved. The portraits watched. The ghosts drifted through walls with the companionable ease of people who had been slightly intangible for several hundred years and were used to it. The castle itself seemed to observe its new inhabitants the way Regulus observed most things, quietly, assessingly, with intelligence behind the stillness. Harry loved it unreservedly. He also noticed almost immediately that something was wrong on the 3rd floor. Not wrong in a visible way, wrong in the particular way that things were wrong when you'd been taught to pay attention. A specific quality of do not look at this that was different from the usual magic of warded spaces. The 3rd floor corridor had a locked door and a notice that said strictly forbidden to all who do not wish to die a very painful death. And most of his classmates treated this as interesting gossip, the kind of mystery that was enjoyable precisely because it wasn't real. Harry treated it as data. He wrote to Regulus that night. There is something on the 3rd floor that is being kept secret in a way that seems deliberate rather than incidental. Professor Dumbledore announced it at the feast. The level of warning suggests something that was placed here on purpose. Do you know what it is? Also, Hermione has already finished the first chapter of Transfiguration, and I have a question about wand angles. Regulus's reply arrived 3 days later, which was fast even by owl post. The 3rd floor. I have a suspicion, but am not certain. Do not investigate. Observe. Note who goes near it, who seems unconcerned, and who seems to know more than they should. Also, wand angles in Transfiguration are a matter of intent as much as precision. The angle channels focus, not force. Experiment at 10 degrees below horizontal first and adjust from there. Ah. P.S. Sirius wants to know if you've tried out for Quidditch. I have told him first years do not try out, and he says to tell you that rules are merely the starting point of negotiation. Please disregard this. Harry read this 3 times. He showed Hermione the parts about the 3rd floor. Because Hermione had also noticed that something was wrong and had been compiling observations in her notebook with the methodical focus of a person who intended to have an opinion about this as soon as she had sufficient evidence. Who goes near it, she said thoughtfully. That's clever. Not what is it, who benefits from people not knowing. He always starts with who has an interest, Harry said. Because things don't happen without people behind them, Hermione said. She wrote something down. I've noticed, Professor Quirrell. The defense teacher? He goes near the 3rd floor corridor after dinner on Tuesdays, Hermione said. I've checked 3 times. It's not incidental. Harry wrote that down too. Potions was, as Regulus had warned him it would be, a problem. Not because Harry was bad at it. He wasn't. He'd been brewing with Regulus since he was 7 and had a feel for temperatures and timing that his classmates mostly lacked. The problem was Professor Snape, who arrived in his classroom like weather, sweeping robes and cold eyes and a voice like something that had decided contempt was its natural register. Potter, Snape said. The first lesson with a quality of attention that felt less like interest and more like accounting. Sir, Harry said, let us see if you live up to your considerable reputation. A pause that was slightly too long to be accidental. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry thought about Regulus's kitchen, about the summer they had spent on sleeping draughts because Regulus had been having bad nights and had approached the problem, characteristically, through systematic understanding of the relevant chemistry. Draught of living death, he said. Asphodel is a flowering plant associated with, symbolically, in the older texts, mourning and regret. Wormwood is bitter, used in absinthe, associated with sorrow. The potion combines a sedative effect with those emotional resonances. Some theorists argue the symbolic components actively enhance the magical efficacy. A silence. Snape looked at him with an expression Harry couldn't quite read. Where did you learn that? My guardian, Harry said. He thought the theoretical framework mattered as much as the practical. Your guardian, Snape said. Sirius Black. And Regulus Black, Harry said. Something crossed Snape's face, complicated fast, gone. Regulus Black taught you potions theory. Since I was 7. Another silence. Then, without comment, Snape moved on to Neville Longbottom, and Harry was left with a distinct impression that something had shifted in the room without anyone announcing it. He wrote to Regulus about Snape that evening. He knew your name, Harry wrote. Not like he'd heard of you, like he knew you specifically. Was he at school when you were? Regulus's reply, when it came, was shorter than usual. Yes, we were in the same year. Slytherin House. He is a complicated man who has done complicated things and arrived on the correct side of them through a long route. If he gives you difficulty, tell me. If he gives you genuine educational attention, which he is capable of when he chooses, learn from him. He knows more about potions than almost anyone alive. Ah. Harry read this twice, heard everything that wasn't said in it, and wrote back, Were you friends? The reply to that one took 5 days and said only, We had a shared interest in survival. At Hogwarts, that was sometimes sufficient. Harry showed Hermione. Hermione said, He always answers the question he wished you'd asked instead of the one you asked. Harry said, I know. I'm used to it. Hermione said, I find it both frustrating and a useful model for information management. Harry said, please don't start doing it. Hermione said nothing, which was either reassurance or its absence. October came with cold and Quidditch and the particular cruelty of 11-year-olds learning, in real time, how to be people. Harry made friends with ease. He had Sirius's social warmth, the ability to make people feel seen that came from spending years with adults who had taken him seriously. But he noticed that Hermione struggled. She knew more than most of their classmates and could not always stop herself from showing it. And there was a period in October when she ate lunch alone and answered questions in class with the slightly too bright precision of someone who has decided that if she cannot have warmth, she will at least have accuracy. Harry sat with her at lunch. This was not a decision he made consciously. He sat with her because she was his person, and she was eating alone, and those two facts were sufficient. Ron joined them the day after, because Ron had grown up in a house where people showed up for each other as a baseline assumption, rather than a choice. And because he'd decided somewhere in the first week that Harry and Hermione were his people and the logistics of that were frankly not very complicated. You lot are weirdly close, said a boy called Seamus Finnegan, not unkindly. Did you know each other before? Since we were 5, Harry said. She's like his sister, Ron said, except they'll actually argue about things. I have 6 brothers, Harry said effectively if you count. He stopped. It's complicated. Remus is sort of, and Sirius has friends who, he gave up. My family is complicated. Whose isn't? Seamus said with feeling. Halloween. It came the way it always came, heavy with memory that Harry carried in his bones. Without it being his own memory, the date was a fact of his family's story, the night everything had broken and then, slowly, been rebuilt. He woke up on October 31st the way he woke up every October 31st, with the specific weight of it, the particular quality of a day that history had loaded before he got to it. He went to Regulus's class in his head, the thing Regulus had taught him to do when something was hard, which was to locate the feeling precisely, to name it, to understand what it was built from. Not grief, exactly. He hadn't known his parents, not in any sense that created the raw wound of direct loss. Something more like the awareness of an absence, the negative space of people who would have been there. At breakfast he wrote them a small note in his head, the way he had since he was 7. Hi. I hope wherever you are there's a good library. I flew yesterday and I was good at it. Sirius says I have your instincts, Dad. I think Regulus is trying to protect me from something he knows about, and I'm going to find out what. I'll be careful. I think you'd like Hermione. I think you'd like Ron, too. Then he ate his toast. Then a troll got into the castle, and the day got considerably more complicated. The troll was, in retrospect, almost beside the point. What mattered was that Hermione was crying in a bathroom because Parvati Patil had said something thoughtless in Charms, and Ron had said something worse in the corridor. And when the troll got in and the teachers were sending everyone back to the dormitories, Harry and Ron had looked at each other and turned in exactly the wrong direction simultaneously, without discussion. Because Hermione didn't know about the troll, and Hermione was in the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor. They got there. The troll was already inside. It was large, grey, and smelled extraordinary. What happened next was, Harry had thought about this afterwards, because he thought about most things afterwards, turning them over to find the mechanism, not heroic so much as practical. Ron levitated the troll's club with a genuine fluke of Wingardium Leviosa that dropped it on the troll's head. Harry jumped on the troll's back and put his wand up its nose, which was disgusting and effective. Hermione, from her position, pressed against the wall, aimed her wand at the pipes overhead with precise intent and brought a cascade of water down on the troll's head, which confused it long enough to matter. The teachers arrived to a troll on the floor and 3 children covered in troll debris. Minerva McGonagall looked at all 3 of them, with an expression Harry recognized from years of doing inadvisable things in Regulus's presence. "Explain," she said. They explained. McGonagall gave Ron and Harry 5 points each. For sheer nerve, she gave Hermione 5 points for the presence of mind to use the Agumenti. She gave all three of them a talking to that was simultaneously clear about the dangers of the situation and notably respectful of the fact that they had, actually, handled a troll without dying. Walking back to the dormitory, Hermione said without preamble, "Ron, that Wingardium Leviosa was excellent." Ron looked at her sideways. "Your water thing was better." A pause. "We should practice together," Hermione said. "Regularly. I find I retain spell work better when I have people to test outcomes against." "I find I actually revise if someone makes me a schedule," Ron said. Hermione took out a notebook. Harry walked slightly behind them and felt enormously privately satisfied. He wrote to Sirius and Regulus that night. "There was a troll. We're fine. Do not panic. Hermione used the Agumenti modification we worked on in July, and it worked brilliantly. Also, I believe I may have located a reason why the third-floor corridor is significant. I am not investigating. I am observing. Please tell Regulus that I am being good." Sirius's reply came the next morning. "There was a troll, and you think the appropriate amount of that information to include is, 'We're fine.' I have 70 follow-up questions. Start with, how big was it?" S. P.S. Regulus says, and I quote, "The modified Agumenti has a reduced accuracy radius at distance. He should remember to adjust for that in enclosed spaces. He is also very glad you're fine and would like you to know that in the most technically expressed way possible." You know what he means. Harry did know what he meant. December came, and with it the cold that made the castle feel truly ancient, heat rising from the fires and frost at the windows, and the particular smell of Hogwarts in winter, which was wood smoke and old stone and something ineffable. Harry moved through it with the alertness of someone who had spent several months collecting data and was beginning to understand the shape of what he'd collected. He knew, by December, that something valuable was being kept on the third floor. He knew because Hagrid had mentioned a vault at Gringotts and then looked immediately sorry that it had been moved from Gringotts in July, the summer before term. He knew that Quirrell went near the corridor on Tuesdays and came back from those visits quieter, with something behind his eyes that Harry had filed under "Observe Further." What he didn't know was what it was. He wrote to Regulus, "I think I know the shape of the situation. There is something here that Dumbledore is protecting. Something moved in a hurry in July. Quirrell has an interest in it. I am not investigating. I am telling you what I see." Regulus's reply arrived in 2 days. "Good. Tell me everything. Ah. P.S. I have a theory about the object. If I am correct, your caution is more important than you know. If Quirrell has an interest, he may not be acting alone. We will talk at Christmas." Christmas at Grimmauld Place. Harry came home on December 23rd and stood in the hallway and smelled cooking and old books and the cold brass smell that was just the house, and felt something in his chest loosen that he hadn't known was held tight. Sirius wrapped him up in the kind of hug that had no interest in being dignified, the kind that said, "You were gone, I noticed. You are back. Excellent." Regulus came out of the kitchen and said, "Good. Come and tell me everything." They sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. Hermione arrived the following day, and they sat for 3 more hours. Sirius made tea and occasionally asked questions, and Regulus listened with the concentrated stillness of someone building a picture. And when they had finished, he sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "The Philosopher's Stone," he said. Harry looked at him. "You knew?" "I suspected. Nicholas Flamel is the only living alchemist, has been living by artificial means for 600 years. If Dumbledore moved something from Gringotts this summer and placed it at Hogwarts under heavy guard, and if Voldemort is attempting to return to a body, he stopped. The stone grants immortality. He would want it. And Quirrell is his access point, Hermione said. A silence. You knew about Quirrell, Harry said to Regulus. I suspected. The dark mark doesn't simply. It leaves traces. On the bearer and on the connections. When you described him, it fit a pattern. Regulus looked at his hands briefly, then back up. You said he has a stammer. In class, in the corridor, when he thinks no one is listening, he doesn't. Regulus was quiet for a moment. Harry, I want you to understand something. He waited until Harry was looking at him properly. Voldemort is not fully present yet. He is diminished, but he is present, and if he is in that castle in any form, the danger is real. I need you to do something that will feel contrary to everything you've been raised to do. Tell me, Harry said. Tell Dumbledore what you know, Regulus said. Tell him about Quirrell, not because he will necessarily act on it. I have some concerns about Dumbledore's methodology that I will not burden you with, but because the information is safer in his hands than only in yours, and because you telling him means he knows that you know, which is its own kind of protection. Harry thought about this. What if he doesn't do anything? Then you write to me immediately and I come to that castle personally, Regulus said. But I want you to try the right channel first. Sirius, who had been quiet for a while, said, and then you stay away from the third floor. Sirius, I am being serious, Sirius said. I am being, in fact, the most serious I have ever been. You are 11. The stone is not your responsibility. You did the right thing. You gathered information. You reported it. You were careful. You don't go near that corridor. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione was looking at her notebook. He could tell from the angle of her pen that she was not writing anything, which meant she was thinking. We'll tell Dumbledore, Harry said. Good, said Regulus. And if Dumbledore doesn't act, Harry, said Sirius. I'm just noting the variable, Harry said. I learned that from Regulus. Regulus, with the expression of someone who has just been made aware of a significant unintended consequence, said nothing. They told Dumbledore in January. Harry sat across the headmaster's desk and laid out his observations with the precision Regulus had drilled into him. Facts separated from inferences, sequence maintained, no editorializing until the data was established. Dumbledore listened with his hands stippled and his blue eyes very still, and made no attempt to interrupt. When Harry finished, the old man was quiet for a moment. You have been very thorough, he said. I was taught to be, Harry said. Regulus Black, Dumbledore said with a tone Harry couldn't place, something between affection and something more complicated. He taught you well. He usually does. Dumbledore looked at him over his spectacles. You are right, that Professor Quirrell bears watching. I want you to know that the stone is protected by more than you have likely perceived, and that I have the situation under observation. A pause. I also want to ask you, Harry, and I ask this as a genuine question, not a test. Do you trust my word on this? Harry thought about it honestly. I think you know more than you tell people, he said. I think you have reasons for that, some of which are probably good. I don't know if that's the same as trust. Dumbledore smiled. A small, real smile. That, he said, is a very Regulus Black answer. People keep saying that, Harry said. They mean it as a compliment, Dumbledore said. As do I. June came fast, the way the end of things does. The stone was nearly taken in the end, not by Quirrell alone, they established later, but by Voldemort using Quirrell as a vessel in a manner that was exactly the kind of body possession Regulus had theorized as a possibility for a diminished spirit. Dumbledore had been away, lured away, and the protections had nearly failed. Harry, who had been told to stay away from the third floor, and Hermione, who had made no such promise but whose notebook contained 17 pages of contingency plans, had gone down when the alarm Not a literal alarm, but the particular alarm of this is the moment the variables have aligned, had presented itself. They had not gone alone. They had told Ron who was Ron and who said, "Right, obviously we're going," with the simplicity of someone for whom this was self-evident. Harry faced Quirrell in the final chamber. And the thing about being raised by people who had themselves encountered Voldemort's particular darkness, who had borne the dark mark and survived caves and Azkaban and done their own reckoning with the cost of evil left unchallenged, was that Harry Potter stood in that room, with Quirrell's hands burning where they touched him, and felt something that was not heroism so much as determination. Not bravery as absence of fear, bravery as Sirius had described it once, doing the thing that matters even though it costs you, which is different from not being afraid. He held on. He held on because Regulus had spent years teaching him that the right thing was rarely the easy thing, and because Sirius had taught him by example that love was worth the cost of it, and because somewhere behind him Hermione and Ron was safe, and that was something he had helped make true. Quirrell collapsed. The stone was safe. Harry woke up in the hospital wing 3 days later to find Sirius Black asleep in a chair beside his bed, both hands wrapped around Harry's, present even in sleep, and Regulus sitting upright in the chair on the other side, awake, his grey eyes steady, looking at Harry with an expression he usually kept very carefully to himself. "Hi," Harry said. "Hello," Regulus said. A pause. "I went to the third floor," Harry said. "I know. Are you angry?" Regulus looked at him for a long moment. "No," he said. "I'm not angry. I understand why you went." His jaw moved slightly. "I am—" He stopped, tried again. "I am very glad you're alive." "I know," Harry said. "I know you are." Sirius at some point during this had woken up. He didn't say anything. He just tightened his grip on Harry's hand.